Shout at me again, and I'll deal you. Black waitress warned mafia boss. You need to see what he did next. The restaurant went silent the moment her voice sliced through the air like a blade. Every waiter froze mid-step. Every diner dropped their forks, and every whisper died on their lips. He had just slammed his hand on the counter, shouting in her face because his wine was a few degrees warmer than perfection. But she didn't flinch. She didn't tremble. She leaned forward, eyes locked on him, her voice steady and sharp. Shout at me again, and I'll deal you. That was it. The kind of moment that rips the air apart and tells everyone in the room that something dangerous has just shifted. Before we dive into this madness, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments and tell me what time it is right now. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because what's coming next will have you gripping your screen till the end. He stared at her, disbelief painted across his face, as if no one in the world had ever spoken to him that way. Not his men, not his enemies, not even the law. The silence after her words felt like it could crush lungs. Then, slowly, he smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind that promised retribution. She turned her back on him and walked away, tray still in hand, not caring that the man she just defied was Leon DeLuca, one of the most feared mafia figures in the city. The customers held their breath. The staff whispered her name like it was a death sentence. But she didn't look back. Later, when her shift ended, the tension still clung to her skin. The manager had pulled her aside, eyes wide with panic, whispering about what she'd done, who she'd challenged, what it could cost her. She brushed it off with a cold laugh. She'd had men shout at her before. None of them scare her anymore. She walked out into the night like a soldier who'd already faced the worst kind of war. The city lights blinked down like they were warning her to turn back, but she didn't. Across the street, Leon sat in his black SUV, cigar glowing red in the dark. He watched her with an expression that could have meant 10 different things. Maybe fury, maybe fascination. He wasn't used to anyone pushing back, least of all a waitress. He exhaled smoke and muttered something to his driver before the car pulled away, following her at a slow, steady pace. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, and didn't care. The next morning, the restaurant buzzed with rumors. People whispered that Leon DeLuca's men had come looking for her. Some said he'd ordered her fired. Others said he wanted her to apologize in person. By the time she walked in, every eye followed her, waiting for something explosive. But she moved with that same unshakable calm, hair tied back, uniform pressed, face unreadable. When Leon's men entered, 3 of them in sharp suits, the whispers turned into silence again. They asked for her. The manager pointed. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight up to them, chin high. The tallest one said the boss wanted a word. She didn't ask why. She just nodded and wiped her hands on her apron before walking out with them. The other waiters watched, terrified, as the door swung shut behind her. Outside, Leon stood by the SUV, sunglasses on, that same faint smirk dancing on his lips. He motioned for her to come closer. She did. He said something low, something only she could hear. Whatever it was, it made her eyes narrow. She shook her head and turned as if to walk away, but his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. She froze. For a moment, it looked like the tension might explode right there on the sidewalk. People passing by slowed down, sensing the storm brewing. She didn't pull away. She just stared at him, her voice cutting through the air again. Don't touch me. He let go. But that smile returned, more dangerous this time. He said something again, something softer, and then nodded to his men. They opened the car door. She stood there for a heartbeat, hesitating, then stepped inside. Inside the SUV, the air was thick. He didn't speak for a while. He just watched her through the tinted glass, his eyes studying every detail like she was some kind of puzzle he couldn't solve. She finally turned to him and asked what he wanted. He told her she had guts, more than most men he'd met in his world. He said he respected that. She scoffed, thinking it was a setup. He said he wanted her to work for him. She laughed in his face. That's when his tone shifted. He told her she didn't have a choice anymore, that her defiance had put her on a list she couldn't erase. She said she didn't care who he was. He leaned closer, whispering that courage is beautiful, but it gets people killed. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't show it. She told him she wasn't afraid to die. He studied her for a long second before letting out a quiet laugh. "You'll regret saying that," he murmured. The car pulled up to a mansion at the edge of the city. Guards flanked the gates, watching her like hawks. She stepped out, still calm, but her mind raced. She didn't know what game this was, but she wasn't about to play by his rules. Inside, everything screamed power. Marble floors, crystal lights, silent men standing in corners like statues. He led her through it like a man giving a tour of his kingdom. When they reached a private room, he turned and said she had two choices: apologize publicly or become part of his organization. She crossed her arms, defiant. He said she didn't understand the magnitude of what she'd done. That men had been killed for less. She said she didn't care about his rules, his world, or his threats. For a long moment, neither moved. Then he did something no one expected. He laughed. Not cruelly, not mockingly. Genuinely. He said she reminded him of himself when he still believed he could control everything. For the first time, the atmosphere shifted. He poured her a drink and said if she was going to challenge him, she'd better be ready to face what came after. She didn't touch the glass. She said she'd face anything, but she wouldn't bow. His smirk returned. He told her she'd just earned his respect and his attention. By the time she left, the night had deepened. The guard's eyes followed her every step. She didn't look back, but once she turned the corner, her hands trembled. She knew this wasn't over. She knew a storm was building, and she was right in the middle of it. Leon watched her from the balcony as she disappeared down the street. He didn't know what it was about her. Maybe her fearlessness, maybe her refusal to kneel, but he couldn't stop thinking about her. The game had started, and this time, he wasn't sure who was hunting who. The next day, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. When she finally did, a familiar voice said, softly, "You've got 10 seconds to decide how your story ends." She hung up before he could finish, but her heart was pounding so hard it felt like thunder in her chest. Somewhere across the city, Leon smiled. The waitress had just declared war on the wrong man. Or maybe the right one. Because sometimes it's not fear that draws two worlds together. It's the fire that starts when neither one backs down. She didn't sleep that night. Every creak in her small apartment sounded like footsteps. Every shadow on the wall looked like a man in a suit waiting to silence her. Her phone stayed face down on a nightstand, still buzzing from unknown numbers she refused to answer. She thought about calling the police, but who would believe a waitress standing up to a mafia boss? Who would even dare write a report with his name on it? So she sat on the edge of her bed, fists clenched, pulse hammering against her ribs, waiting for the night to make its next move. At 3 a.m., it did. A car engine rumbled outside. Not fast, slow, deliberate. She walked to the window and peeked through the blinds. Black SUV. Same kind Leon had that night. Her stomach dropped. The car didn't park. It just idled there for a moment, headlights cutting through the thin curtains like blades. It drove off. She exhaled shakily, realizing she'd been holding her breath. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. It was just starting. The next morning, she showed up to work like nothing had happened. Everyone stared at her as if she were already a ghost. The manager tried to pull her aside, whispering that maybe she should take a few days off, maybe disappear for a while, maybe stop being brave. She ignored him and clocked in. She wasn't running from anyone. Not from Leon, not from his men, not from anyone who thought fear was stronger than fire. 2 hours into her shift, the restaurant doors opened. The same black SUV parked outside. Every waiter froze. Leon walked in calm, confident, eyes hidden behind dark shades. The sound of his shoes on the marble floor was the only thing anyone could hear. He stopped at her counter, took off his glasses, and said something quiet enough for only her to hear. The color drained from her manager's face as he watched. She didn't move. She didn't speak. Then she nodded once and walked out from behind the counter. He followed. The room buzzed with panic as the door swung, closed behind them. Outside, the city heat pressed against them. He stood there, silent for a long second before saying she was braver than most men he'd met in his life. She said bravery wasn't the point. Respect was. His expression flickered. For the first time, he looked intrigued. He told her to get in the car. She crossed her arms, refusing. He leaned closer, voice dropping low, saying he wasn't asking. She stared him down again, that same fire burning in her eyes. Finally, she said if he wanted to talk, they'd do it in public. He laughed softly, then agreed. They sat at a table outside a cafe, just a block away. His men stood around, scanning the crowd like wolves. He leaned forward, fingers drumming on the table, asking if she had any idea who she was dealing with. She said she didn't care about names, only actions. He said her defiance could get her killed. She said his arrogance already had. For a moment, his eyes darkened. Then, slowly, a grin curved his lips. He said she was the first person who'd ever made him feel human again. The words caught her off guard. She frowned, unsure if it was a compliment or a threat. He said something had been dead inside him for years, buried under money, blood, and loyalty. But the night she shouted at him, something snapped, like she'd woken a part of him he didn't know existed anymore. She told him she wasn't here to fix broken men. He said he wasn't asking for that. He said he just wanted to understand how someone with nothing could look him in the eye like an equal. She leaned in, eyes steady, and said maybe because she wasn't afraid to lose anything. He watched her for a long moment, then said fearlessness was dangerous because it made people unpredictable. He told her he needed people like that. She asked what he meant, and he said he wanted her to work for him, not as a servant, but as a partner. She almost laughed. She said she wasn't interested in being another piece on his chessboard. He said she wasn't a piece. She was the player he couldn't anticipate. He left her with a card, just his name and a number. Then he stood, put his glasses back on, and said she'd call when she realized she didn't belong in a world that underestimates her. She told him she'd rather scrub floors than stand next to a man who uses power to control others. He stopped walking for a second, turned back, and said, "You already have power. You just don't know it yet." When he left, the tension didn't. She sat there for a long time, staring at that card like it was a loaded gun. By the time she went back to work, the manager had already heard. He said Leon had paid for every customer's meal and left her a tip so large it could have paid her rent for a year. She didn't touch it. She told him to donate it or burn it. She didn't care. That night, she got home to find her apartment door slightly open. Her heart froze. She stepped inside, scanning the room. Everything looked untouched, except the kitchen table. The card he'd given her sat there, perfectly centered, like someone had returned to make sure she hadn't forgotten. She grabbed it, threw in the trash, and locked every window. But when she checked the trash an hour later, it was gone. The following days blurred. She felt eyes on her wherever she went. At work, cars idled too long outside. On her walk home, footsteps followed too close. She told herself it was paranoia until she found a black envelope under her door with a single note inside. "You don't run from me. You walk beside me." Her chest tightened. She tore it up and flushed it, but the words stayed burned in her mind. One night, as she was closing the restaurant, two men in dark suits appeared by the door. They said Leon wanted to see her. She said no. They said it wasn't a request. She tried to walk past them, but one stepped forward, blocking her path. She didn't hesitate. She swung the tray in her hand and cracked it across his jaw. The other reached for her, but she drove her knee into his stomach, grabbed her bag, and ran. The street was chaos. Honking cars, flashing lights, noise everywhere. She darted into an alley, her lungs burning, her mind racing. She didn't stop until she reached a crowded bus stop. She sat there, shaking, staring at the lights in the distance. That's when her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Against every instinct, she answered. His voice came through, calm and composed. "You're faster than I thought." She froze, unable to speak. He said he admired her fight, that he wasn't angry, just impressed. She hung up and threw the phone onto the pavement, heart pounding. The next morning, she got a new phone, new number, new everything. But when she turned it on, the first text came instantly. "You can change the number, not fate." She nearly smashed it against the wall. 2 days later, her world flipped. A call came from her sister in tears. Their mother had been in a car accident. She rushed to the hospital, fear tearing through her like wildfire. But when she arrived, the doctor said her mother had been released hours ago by someone who said they were family. Her heart dropped. She ran out to the parking lot, scanning for any sign of them. And then she saw it, the same black SUV. The window rolled down. Her mother sat inside, unharmed but confused. Leon was beside her, smiling like a man who knew he'd just won a game she didn't know she was playing. She ran up to the car, shouting, asking what he wanted. He said he just wanted to talk, but this time, she'd listen. She'd clench her fists, rage building in her chest. He said she had two choices again: walk away now and live with fear, or come with him and find out why the world bends for power. She said she wasn't like him. He said she could be if she stopped fighting herself. She stood there, torn between fury and confusion, her mother's frightened eyes watching her from inside the car. Leon leaned out of the window, voice smooth and calm. "You can't win from the outside," he said. "You want respect? Step into the fire and take it." And before she could answer, the SUV door swung open. His men stepped out, waiting. Her heart raced. Every instinct screamed to run, but deep down, something darker whispered to stay. Because maybe, just maybe, this was the only way to fight back. Her mother's trembling voice begged her not to go, but something in her chest had already gone quiet. That silence, that strange pull, made her step forward even when her mind screamed no. The SUV loomed like a beast, glossy and black, its doors yawning open, waiting to swallow her whole. Leon's men didn't speak. They just watched her like hawks as she climbed in. The leather smelled of danger and power. Her mother's eyes filled with tears as the door closed, shutting out the world she used to know. The car rolled forward, and everything she'd ever been, a waitress, a daughter, an ordinary woman, faded in the rearview mirror. Leon sat across from her, calm as ever, his eyes dark pools of amusement. He told her she'd done the right thing. She said nothing. He said fear was just the body's way of telling you you're standing too close to change. She told him she didn't want change. She wanted her life back. He smiled faintly, saying that her life, as she knew it, ended the night she stood up to him. Now she was in a new one, whether she liked it or not. They drove for an hour. No one spoke. The car stopped in front of a massive compound, tall gates, guards with rifles, lights that cut through the night like daggers. When she stepped out, the air felt heavier, like it carried secrets. Leon led her inside, through corridors lined with portraits and marble floors that clicked under her shoes. He pushed open a door to a room filled with screens showing feeds from every corner of the city, streets, buildings, restaurants, even the one she worked in. Her blood ran cold. He told her this was how power worked. Information, control, vision. He said he didn't build an empire with violence. He built it by knowing everyone's weakness before they knew it themselves. She asked why she was there. He said because he couldn't read her, because she didn't break when she should have, because she had something inside him he didn't understand, something he needed to learn or destroy. She told him he wasn't going to destroy her. He said, maybe not, but the world might. Then he handed her a file. Her name was printed on the cover. Inside were pictures of her mother, her sister, even her old address. She flipped through the pages with shaking hands. Every part of her life was there. Every secret, every fear. He said now she understood. Nothing she had was really hers anymore. She looked up at him, heart pounding, and said he was a monster. He said maybe, but monsters were just humans who stopped pretending. He asked her one question. What did she want most? She didn't answer. He said he could give it to her. Money, safety, revenge, freedom, anything. All she had to do was step into his world and play his game. She said she'd rather starve than be his puppet. He smiled slowly, stood up, and said hunger always changes the tune. Days passed. She wasn't allowed to leave the compound. Guards followed her everywhere. At night, she stared out at the city lights beyond the walls, wondering if she'd ever see home again. Then, one morning, Leon appeared in the courtyard, dressed in black, talking to men she didn't recognize. Their faces were hard, dangerous. When he noticed her, he called her over. He said she was going to help him with something. They drove to a warehouse on the docks. The smell of salt and oil hung thick in the air. Inside were crates stacked high, men counting cash, loading weapons. Her stomach twisted. Leon said every empire had its shadow, and this was his. But there was a traitor among them, someone stealing from him, hiding shipments. He said he wanted her to find out who. She laughed bitterly, asking if he thought she was stupid. He said he thought she was smart enough to stay alive. He told her she had 2 hours. Find the traitor, or he'd make sure the police found evidence that would destroy her life. Then he left her there, surrounded by men who looked at her with suspicion and malice. Her pulse raced. She walked through the rows of crates, pretending to check inventory, listening to their conversations. One man, short, nervous, constantly checking his phone, caught her eye. She remembered how Leon watched people, how he read their smallest movements. So she tried it. When she confronted the man, he froze. She said Leon sent her to collect the missing cut. The man's eyes darted, his breath quickened. That was enough. When Leon returned, she pointed him out. The man broke, begging, shouting that he didn't mean to steal, that he was just trying to feed his family. Leon didn't flinch. He turned to her and said this was what mercy looked like in their world. Then he pulled the trigger. The sound echoed through her bones. She screamed at him, but he just stared at her, saying she made the choice, not him. That was the moment she understood. He wasn't teaching her obedience. He was testing her strength. That night, she didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that man's face. She thought about escaping, but the compound was guarded like a fortress. She knew if she tried, she'd vanish before sunrise. But she couldn't stay either. She needed a plan. The next morning, Leon came to her room. He said she'd done well. She said she didn't want his approval. He said she already had it, whether she wanted it or not. Then he said something that made her blood run cold. He said her mother and sister were under his protection now, living in one of his safe houses. She demanded to know where. He said that depended on her. She lunged at him, fists clenched, but he caught her wrists effortlessly, pulling her close. He said power wasn't taken, it was earned. He told her to remember that before she tried to fight him again. He left her shaking with fury and helplessness. But she wasn't broken, just burning. She started watching, listening. Every word his men said, every key card they used, every security camera placement. She memorized everything. If she was going to escape, she needed to think like him. A week later, Leon announced he was hosting a gathering. Business allies, politicians, men who could destroy lives with a single phone call. He told her she would attend, standing beside him. She refused. He said she'd already agreed by surviving this long. That night, she was dressed in black, her hair pulled back, eyes sharp as blades. When they entered the ballroom, every head turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Leon introduced her as his new right hand. The words made her stomach churn. As the night went on, she played the role, smiling when needed, watching quietly when not. But inside, her mind was racing. She saw the guards rotate, the exits open and close, the momentary gaps in security. Then she caught sight of something across the room. One of Leon's men whispering urgently into his earpiece. Eyes locked on her. She froze. Leon noticed. He excused himself, walking toward her slowly. She backed up, heart pounding. He said someone had just tried to breach the gate. Her blood turned to ice. He said it might be a rival gang, or someone from her past who thought she was in trouble. Her mind raced to her mother and sister. She asked what he did with them. He said they were safe. For now, she realized what this was. He wasn't protecting them. He was keeping them as leverage. In that moment, something inside her snapped. Fear turned into fury. She grabbed the nearest glass of wine and smashed it on the table, the shards biting into her palm. Leon's men reacted instantly, reaching for her, but she shouted that if any of them came closer, she'd make sure the entire room knew who he really was. For a second, the chaos froze. Leon just looked at her, calm, unreadable, and then slowly smiled. He said the difference between courage and suicide was timing. She glared at him, blood dripping from her hand, and said timing was exactly what she'd been waiting for. Then, with a calmness that surprised even herself, She dropped the glass, turned her back on him, and walked straight out of the room. The guards moved to stop her, but Leon raised his hand. No one moved. He watched her disappear through the doors, a storm behind his eyes. That night, she didn't go home. She didn't even know where home was anymore. She just kept walking through the city streets until dawn painted the sky gray. She knew he'd come for her again. He always did. But next time, she wouldn't just survive. She'd make him regret ever thinking he could own her. She didn't stop walking until her legs gave out beneath a flickering streetlight in a part of the city that smelled like burnt metal and rain. Her palms were still bleeding from glass. The sting kept her awake. Every sound, a car backfiring, a dog barking, footsteps echoing too close, made her flinch. But exhaustion couldn't quiet the storm in her chest. The image of Leon standing there, calm, smirking, letting her walk away like she was nothing, haunted her. It wasn't mercy. It was a message. He was giving her space to fall apart, so he could be the one to pull her back together under his control. That was how he worked. But this time she swore he wouldn't. When the sun rose, she was at the edge of the docks, sitting on a broken bench, her hair tangled from the wind. She pulled out the small flash drive she'd swiped from Leon's desk the night before, tucked beneath the cuff of her sleeve. She didn't know what was on it, but something told her it mattered. She just needed a place to open it, someone to trust. And that was the problem. No one could be trusted anymore. A shadow fell over her. A man in a faded cap and a jacket too large for him stood there, hands raised in surrender. He said he wasn't a threat. She told him to keep walking. He said her face was all over the news, that Leon's men were offering money for her safe return. That word, safe, made her laugh bitterly. He hesitated, then said if she wanted to disappear, he knew someone who could help. She didn't believe him, but she followed anyway. She didn't have time to hesitate. He led her through alleys and into a building that looked abandoned. Inside, it wasn't. Screens, radios, maps, people working quietly, faces lit by cold blue light. It was some kind of network. A woman stepped forward, sharp-eyed, efficient. She asked who sent her. The man said he found her at the docks. The woman looked her over, recognizing her name immediately. She said they'd been watching Leon for months, trying to expose his network, but couldn't get inside. She asked what she had. She handed her the flash drive. The woman plugged it into a laptop. Lines of code, documents, videos began flashing across the screen. Transactions, names officials Leon had bribed, murders covered up. It was enough to burn his entire empire to ash. The woman looked at her differently now, not like a victim, but a weapon. She said with this, they could destroy him. She asked if she was ready to testify. She shook her head. Leon would never let her live long enough to see a courtroom. The woman said there was another way. Hit him where it hurts before he knows what's coming. That word echoed through her like fire before. It meant acting faster, smarter, more ruthless than him. It meant playing his game better than he did. She said she wanted in. The woman warned her this wasn't revenge. It was war. She said she knew, and she was ready. That night, she slept in a safe house for the first time in days. The mattress was thin, but the silence was heavier than anything she'd felt. She couldn't rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Leon's face, the calmness before the storm. He was out there, somewhere, probably already hunting her. By morning, the plan was in motion. The woman handed her a small earpiece and a burner phone. They were going to infiltrate one of Leon's accounts, an offshore transfer happening that afternoon. She would go in posing as one of his couriers, upload a virus through a tablet, and vanish. Simple. Dangerous. Perfect. She walked into the bank's marble lobby like she belonged there. Her hair tied tight, dark glasses hiding her eyes, a steady calm masking the hurricane inside her. She handed over the briefcase Leon's contact was expecting. Security was tight, but she moved like a ghost. When the banker opened the case, she tapped her wrist twice, sending the signal. The virus spread quietly, undetected, copying everything Leon had hidden in that account. His offshore assets, client lists, blackmail files. Within minutes, it was done. She left before anyone realized what had happened. But the moment she stepped outside, she knew something was wrong. A black car idled across the street. A man in a suit stepped out, holding a phone to his ear, his eyes scanning the crowd. Then another. Then another. Leon's men. Her pulse spiked. She turned, merging into the flow of pedestrians. The earpiece crackled, the woman's voice telling her to stay calm, keep walking. But the men were moving faster now. She ducked into an alley, pulling her jacket tighter, and slipped through a side door into a restaurant kitchen. The staff shouted, startled, but she didn't stop. She burst through the back exit just as the first man appeared at the other end of the alley. She ran until her lungs burned, through markets, over fences, down narrow streets that smelled like smoke and panic. She reached a dead end. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Then headlights flared at the far end, an SUV pulling up slow, deliberate. The driver's door opened. Leon stepped out. Calm, collected, terrifying. He looked at her like he'd been expecting this moment. He said he admired her effort. She said he'd lost control. He laughed quietly, saying control was an illusion. Then he motioned to his men, and they moved forward. She reached for the small pistol hidden in her waistband, a gift from a woman at the network. But before she could raise it, Leon lifted his hand. The men stopped. He said he wasn't here to kill her. Not yet. He wanted to know how she got into his system. She said maybe he should ask his accountant. His jaw clenched. He stepped closer, the faint scent of his cologne cutting through the air. He said he'd warned her about playing games. She said she learned from the best. His eyes flickered, just a hint of something human, regret, pride, maybe both. Then the sound of sirens broke the moment. Leon's head snapped toward the street. Someone had tipped off the cops. He cursed, grabbed her arm, and pulled her into the SUV. She fought him, but he held her firm, saying if the police caught her with him, she'd never walk free again. She realized he was right. She was still in his shadow, whether she liked it or not. The car tore through the streets, swerving through traffic until they reached a bridge. The sirens faded behind them. He stopped the car halfway across and turned to her. He said the world was closing in on both of them now, that she had something that could destroy him, and everyone connected to him. He asked what she really wanted. She said she wanted him to feel powerless, just once. He smiled faintly and said he already did. She frowned, confused, but before she could speak, he opened the door, stepped out into the rain, and walked to the railing. He said power meant nothing when the only person who ever stood up to you now wanted you dead. She told him this wasn't about him. It was about everyone he hurt. He said maybe, but somewhere along the line, it became about her too. He looked back at her, rain streaking his face, and said she reminded him of who he used to be before power rotted everything. Then headlights cut through the downpour. Another SUV approaching fast. He told her to go. She refused. He shouted that this was her one chance. Bullets shattered the night. The approaching SUV erupted in gunfire. Rivals. Leon's men returned fire. Chaos swallowed the bridge. He dragged her behind the car, shielding her as glass exploded around them. She screamed at him to let her fight, but he shook his head, saying this was his mess, not hers. A bullet grazed his shoulder. She grabbed the gun from his hand and fired back, her pulse roaring in her ears. Two of the attackers went down. Another bullet hit the SUV's engine. It burst into flames. Leon pushed her toward the edge, telling her to jump. She hesitated. He looked at her with something raw in his eyes, something she'd never seen before. Trust. Then he said quietly, if she ever made it out alive, to use what she had and burn his empire to the ground. The blast from the burning vehicle roared behind them. She jumped. Cold water swallowed her whole. The current pulled her under. When she surfaced, gasping, the bridge was engulfed in smoke and fire. She didn't know if Leon was alive, but she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. He'd save her life, and now she owed him something she didn't understand. As she dragged herself onto the muddy shore, coughing, shaking, she looked back at the burning skyline. She whispered through her chattering teeth that she would finish what he started, even if it meant becoming everything she once feared. The fire behind her crackled, reflected in her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like someone born in the ashes, ready to rise from them. The river carried her miles downstream before she finally crawled out, half conscious, her body trembling from the cold and shock. The city skyline glowed faintly in the distance, Leon's empire burning behind her like the gates of hell closing. She lay on the muddy bank, chest heaving, trying to process the chaos, the gunfire, the explosion. She didn't know if Leon was alive, but the words he'd said before she jumped echoed through her like a curse. Burn it to the ground. By morning, she was in the safe house again. The woman from the network, Mira, looked at her like she'd seen a ghost. She told her the explosion was all over the news. Authorities found wreckage on the bridge, burnt vehicles, bodies charred beyond recognition. They said Leon Romano, the infamous mafia boss, was dead. But she didn't believe it. Not yet. Leon was the kind of man who didn't die easy. Mira said it didn't matter. What she brought back, Leon's files, the virus data, was enough to finish what he started. They began leaking everything: bribes, murders, drug routes, names of politicians on Leon's payroll. Within 48 hours, the city erupted. Cops raided clubs, warehouses, mansions. Men who'd once bowed to Leon now turned on each other. Power collapsed like wet paper. His empire was falling apart faster than anyone imagined. But peace didn't come with it. She couldn't rest. Every headline, every broadcast that declared him dead, made her feel emptier. Leon had saved her life when he could have ended it. That wasn't mercy. That was unfinished business. She needed to know. One night, while Mira and her team celebrated another leak going viral, she slipped out. She followed a trail, an encrypted message that pinged her burner phone. It was a location, the old church at the edge of the docks. Her heart raced. Only one person could have sent that. She went alone. The church was dark, abandoned, the roof caved in, the smell of salt water and decay thick in the air. Candles flickered on the altar. And there he was, Leon, alive. His right arm was bandaged, his face pale, but eyes burning the same way they always had. He looked at her like he'd expected her. She asked why he didn't stay dead. He said men like him didn't get to rest until their sins were balanced. He'd lost everything: his men, his power, his name. He was hunted by the same people he once ruled. He said she'd done what he couldn't: destroy the monster from the inside. He looked at her with something almost proud, almost broken. She said this wasn't over until every name on that list faced justice. He nodded, saying there was one name she hadn't seen yet. Hers. He'd added her to his database weeks before she escaped. Insurance. It meant the people she'd just exposed would come for her too. She froze, realizing what he'd done. He said the only way to protect her now was to erase her completely, to make her vanish. She refused. She wasn't going to hide again. Not after everything. He smiled faintly, saying she reminded him of himself before the darkness took over. He said she still had something to fight for. Then he handed her a small drive, the last piece of his empire, encrypted data that could finish the job for good. He told her to take it and go. She asked what he'd do. He said he'd make sure they followed him instead of her. Before she could argue, he stepped back into the shadows. She called after him, but he was already gone. Moments later, she heard the sound of engines outside, tires screeching. Black SUVs, the same kind that chased her before. Gunfire tore through the night, shattering the church windows. She dove for cover, clutching the drive to her chest. She looked toward the doorway, saw Leon standing in the open, firing back without hesitation. He was outnumbered, bleeding, but relentless. He yelled for her to run. She didn't want to leave him again, but she knew what this meant. If she stayed, everything would end there. She sprinted through the side exit, tears mixing with rain as she ran through the dockyard. Behind her, the gunfire intensified. Then an explosion. The church went up in flames, the shockwave knocking her to her knees. She screamed his name, but the roar swallowed it whole. Hours later, emergency crews arrived. The place was nothing but rubble and smoke. No survivors. No trace of Leon. Some said he died in that fire. Others said he escaped. She didn't care what the world believed anymore. What mattered was what she carried, the final piece of his empire's destruction. She delivered the drive to Mira. It contained not just the names of Leon's enemies, but records of every corrupt official who helped them rise. Myra's team sent it to every major outlet. By dawn, the city was shaking. Arrests, protests, lawsuits, everything Leon built, every lie that fed his empire, came crashing down. For the first time, she saw the sun rise without fear. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. She stood by the water where it all began, watching the waves crash against the pier, wondering if he was out there somewhere, alive, free, maybe even at peace. She whispered that it was done, that she kept her promise. The wind carried her words into the sea. Months passed. The city moved on. New leaders rose, cleaner ones, maybe. She went back to work, not as a waitress, but as a voice in a movement that took Leon's empire apart. People called her brave, but she didn't feel that way. She just felt changed, hardened. And sometimes, late at night, she swore she could still feel his presence, like a ghost watching over the chaos he'd once ruled. Justice had been served, but at a cost neither of them could escape. She'd lost her fear, her innocence, her name, but gained something else. Power. The kind that didn't come from control, but from surviving what was meant to destroy her. And in that strange, quiet peace, she realized Leon was right. Power meant nothing unless you knew how to give it up. Some fires burn to destroy, but others burn to cleanse. Her story reminds us that strength isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming what fear tried to steal. Every fall can be fuel for something greater, and sometimes justice comes from the ones you least expect. Subscribe for more heart-stopping stories like this. Drop a comment with your thoughts, share this with your friends, and get ready, because the next story will hit even harder.